Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Momentum Mori Fight Club. My name is Mary.
And my name is Fidel, and today we have with us one of my brothers here at seminary. His name is Jack Oxley. Jack, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, brother. Um, okay, so you have talked to me a little bit about how losing your dad was one of the most painful experiences that you've ever gone through. Could you share a little bit about that? Like what happened?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So just about 3 years ago, my dad, Tom, he passed away after a brief illness that came on pretty suddenly. Um, it was something along the lines of Lewy body dementia, and he had a really bad fall where he probably did some brain damage. We're not entirely sure. There's different theories about what took him, but yeah, so he died pretty much like 2 months after he was diagnosed, and he declined pretty quickly. So hard to believe it's been 3 years. Um, so praise God, it wasn't a super long process, and as I've looked back the last couple of years, I realized that he had been declining for a while. So I think the Lord preserved us from a lot of suffering of diagnosing him with something or another. And thankfully, he didn't have to go through a long and painful illness or more suffering than he had to. Um, so yeah, he died just about 3 years ago, and you know, even with the pandemic happening, it was still pretty soon after the pandemic. We were able to have him at home with us, and he passed away at my parents' home, pretty much with family around, and he was on hospice for like 10 days. And it was just a litany of people, a family and friends coming in and having the opportunity to say goodbye to him. And my mom, my brother, and I, who got to spend a lot of time with him and to take care of him physically, um, but also to, say our goodbyes over those 10 days. It was, like I said, losing him, especially the aftermath of the grief, is probably the worst thing I've ever experienced. But also those days when he was at home, especially versus the hospital, were also some of the most joyful days I've ever experienced. Like we were often laughing and remembering stories far more than we were crying or sitting in some kind of like dour silence. So, it's just like the cross. It was extremely hard to embrace, but it was extremely sweet in the end. The Lord gave us more than He took away.
Nice,
Um,
nice.
yeah, the illness and the death like really wasn't dramatic. It just was pretty sudden. So there's not a ton more than that.
And what's your background and your family's background and with the faith?
So I would like to say I'm a cradle Catholic, but I'm not really. I had more a leg out of the cradle, um, and kind of falling out. Um, so my mom's side of the family, they are all, the big Catholic families from like the 60s, kind of here, where I'm from, just, big Catholic families, 5+ kids, Catholic school all the way through, that kind of mentality. My dad, his family was always religious, but they were not Catholic. Ironically, I have an uncle and aunt who became Catholic on their own volition, but had nothing to do with their upbringing. Um, so yeah, my dad was away, but in a Protestant church when I was growing up. So I grew up in a divided household. Really, my mom was away from the Catholic faith, and she came and went from it. But my dad felt convicted to start going back to church when I was in elementary school after the death of his father, my grandfather. And that's kind of what started my exposure to the faith. I had received my sacraments in the Catholic Church on time, but it wasn't connected to any like practice of the faith. It was more, we feel like we should do this, which, that's still a gift, but unfortunately I didn't go further than that at the time. and obviously I received real grace there. Um, but a lot of my meaningful like church experiences and early like teaching came from the Protestant church, which thankfully was pretty solid in a lot of the important things. Not liturgically, but the essential things of like morality and everything. I was formed in important ways through that. But in middle school and early high school, I felt convicted to come back to start pursuing the Catholic faith. I just something in me, the Holy Spirit moved me to come to it. And that was like during a period where my mom was more active with the local parish. And so I just started walking that journey on my own, kind of with my mom, not really. And I decided eventually to leave my dad's church, which was very painful at the time because he felt like I was leaving him in a way, because that was one of our few things together. But by the grace of God, I knew like I have to go to the one true church. Um, so I started going to the Catholic church that I had been in and out of for years through with the sacraments and like activities, but never really practicing. Um, my mom eventually became a little bit more practicing, but again, she's come back, come and gone. And then my dad stayed at his church. Um, and as we'll get to in a minute, we didn't begin as a Catholic family, but I would say we ended and are now a Catholic family, which I'll get to when we talk more about the suffering, I suppose, of his death.
It's awesome, brother. Thank you.
Okay, so at the time that your father passed away, how old were you?
So 23 or 20,
23.
that would have been 23.
23. And then you had come, or you're already back in the Catholic Church at this time?
Yes, by the beginning of college at 19, I was fully practicing sacramental Catholic by that point.
Gotcha. Okay. So then at that point, um, you're fully in the church, your father's passed away. How did your faith help you to get through that experience of losing your dad?
So really, I mean, it started, um, I don't know if this, I may be jumping questions on this, but this is kind of
Okay.
the heart of everything is, I mean, my faith helped me to begin grieving him as he was getting sick 3 years ago. Um, especially as I was really like still new and like maturing in my faith throughout college and my early working career before seminary. I had good influences in my life that really encouraged me to take evangelization very seriously. Really, I mean, I was evangelized. I wouldn't say I'm a convert. I don't know what you would call me, but I was definitely had to be convicted to follow the Lord. And I really felt deeply convicted that the Catholic Church is the one true church. And if we say what we mean, we should fight for people to be in it, just like people fought for me to be in it.
Absolutely.
Um, if we say there's no salvation outside the church, which I would obviously the Lord can work outside the church, but the surest way of salvation is by all means the sacraments through the cross, and
Absolutely.
any salvation is tied to Jesus on the cross. You can't get around that. Um, so where I'm going with this is I felt deeply convicted by that, and for years, my mom and I, in various ways over time, wanted my dad to become Catholic, have their marriage solemnized in the church, the whole thing. But, for various reasons, it just never happened. He was resistant. They tried going through the annulment process for his previous marriages. It just didn't happen. Um, but, you know, the day that my mom told me he was going to be coming home on hospice, and it was pretty certain that he was going to die, some of the first calls I made were to priests that I knew to be like, I want my dad to become Catholic. How can we make this happen? So my spiritual director at the time, who by that point we'd been in direction for about a year and a half, And he had even offered, as my dad was trying to get sick, like, maybe I can help you with like the annulment process and try and get that figured out. But if it comes down to it, we can, you know, there's a lot of options at the end of life. So my spiritual director talked to the head of the marriage tribunal in the diocese we were in, got it cleared for him to enter the church because obviously you have to be free. You can have any like marriage impediments to enter the church. Like anyone RCIA needs to get a declaration of nullity for any non-sacramental marriages. I could be wrong on that, so please check that for me. But I'm pretty sure that's the case. And I don't want to be
Okay.
leading any. I don't want to lead anyone to error. But like marriages and non-Catholic marriages and entering the church, there's always some kind of hiccup check that has to happen. Anyways, so my dad, my spiritual director, did the check and he said if he's willing, he can enter. So my spiritual director came with my mom and I one afternoon because he was still in the hospital for a bit before he came home. And he asked my dad, "Do you want to become Catholic?" And my dad, he had stopped speaking by this point because he lost his ability to communicate except random sounds. And he said yes, he nodded yes. And my spiritual director felt confident that that was enough. So he was conditionally baptized. He was anointed, given the Lord in the Eucharist. I wanted him to wear a scapular and Benedictine medals. So he was enrolled in the Brown Scapular and given the apostolic pardon, which, if people don't know, that remits all temporal punishments. Like, it's insane. Like, that's just an insane thing. Like, I struggle to do the penance for my own confession. Like, and when people are dying, and this is what I came to realize, the church has such a treasury of graces for people at the end of their lives, and she gives it so freely through her priests. Like it's not like it's insane like how easy it is. I mean, obviously we're called to have true faith in Christ, and I wouldn't recommend anyone gamble with their souls at the end of their lives, but like
But it is awesome how much the church gives at death. It is really, really incredible.
it's insane. I'm like, it's really this easy?
Yeah.
Um, not that carrying the cross through life is easy, but anyways, what I'm getting at is I and I had even done this for another relative around the same time. It's like if I believe what I say and this is important to me, I want to do everything I can that's in my power to have my dad become Catholic. And praise God, he freely chose, and as much as he was able to choose to become Catholic, and he went through everything and was reconciled to the church. Um, and that day, my mom also went to confession for the first time in a while. And there are many graces that put my heart at ease more than anything. Because the Lord says, don't worry about those who can kill the body, but worry about those who can kill the soul. And, obviously we are created good as body and soul to be human. That's what we learned here at school. But, when my dad was heading towards the end of his life, I cared far more that he would see God for all eternity than worrying about extending his life by, not that it was my choice over his medical decisions, but I cared far more that his soul was prepared to meet the Lord than preserving his life for however much longer. It is a good thing. It is a good and just and necessary thing to take care of those that we're responsible for. We should preserve people's lives. It is a good thing. But when it's pretty much the writing is on the wall, I mean, I wanted to make sure to live the fourth commandment, to follow the precepts of the faith. I wanted him to be prepared to meet the Lord. Um, and I knew my mom was open to it. I wasn't sure how she would take it, but she was more than willing. Um, I think that would have been harder to do, even though it was my dad's choice. It would have been harder to do all that without her being willing. So, I mean, they couldn't have their marriage annulled or solemnized. That just wasn't an option. but we ended up as a Catholic family. My dad had a Catholic funeral mass, which confused a lot of the Protestant folks he was deep friends with. They showed up
I
and
can imagine.
they
I can
looked a little
imagine they'd
lost.
be confused. Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, so my faith helped me through it by trying to heed the Lord's commands to baptize to the ends of the world, as he says in Matthew 28. That's what I was trying to do, and I was able to do it with my dad. Really, the Lord put the thoughts in my heart to be able to do all that. I mean, that didn't, and we'll get to this, I guess, in the next couple questions. It didn't take away the pain. Like, again, it's the worst thing I've ever experienced. Um, but it puts my heart at ease now. And I can't say he's in heaven. That's not my place to say, but it gives me much greater peace about where he is versus a lot other family members that have died that weren't baptized or not Catholic. So
Yeah. And if I can just say, brother, like what a beautiful testament you are, as a good and holy son to help prepare your father for that sacred moment. It's really beautiful. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Okay, brother. So how are the dynamics within your family, and how did the suffering that you guys went through help your family as a whole and their faith?
yeah, so as you can imagine from all of that, like it was a very intimate moment, and my mom got to see it. I can at least speak more to what I saw in her, and obviously she's still around, so I don't want to share too
Divulge too
much,
much.
but she most of my childhood was away from the church in one way or another. I don't know how technical you want to get with if she was away or non-practicing or whatever. I think it's hard. That's maybe not a responsible way to say it, but I saw, especially this first couple of months, like she was turning to the Lord and turning to the things of the church to help her in her faith journey. Um, so we started going to mass consistently together for probably about, well, pretty much up until I went to seminary, so 2.5 years. We started going to mass. I would go with her, and we would go on Sundays together at the parish that I grew up in. So in her, I saw just a desiring for God because, you know, with our world falling out underneath us, like and also just with the type of people in our lives, I think the faith in the church was a steady thing that she could cling to, that I was able to cling to. And, I would still say broadly that um, she's more practicing now than I've ever seen her. You know, and again, this may be a bit dramatic to say, but just like there's many stories of the saints, like when people are coming to reverence their bodies as they've died, miracles start to occur. Like Saint Katerina Tekakwitha, her body was just laid out in a home, and people would come touch her body, and all sorts of things started, like people started being healed, and there's many stories of the saints, especially the incorrupt saints, where that starts happening. Um, I definitely saw in, like my mom going to confession right after he was received into the church. I just see like from those couple of weeks we had with him, especially him being Catholic and receiving the sacraments, just a lot of grace is being poured into our lives, and being able to turn to the things of the church to help deal with this terrible thing. And I think that goes into another part of what we're called to as Catholics to do. And I was trying the best in my life to live this out. And I think, I was able to help model this with my mom is, the church gives us many resources and many recourses to be able to bring our suffering and make it meaningful. The church gives us tools to make our suffering meaningful, to be able to attach it to the cross, bring it to the cross. And I think especially in that time, my mom and I were able to do that. Um, And, overall, I think it made us more faithful to the Lord because it emptied us and we were able to cling to Him more in that time. Not perfectly by any means, but the faith gave us tools, resources, gave us somewhere to take our suffering. And I'd like to think my mom did that in her own way. Um, I don't know if there was a broad change in faith overall in our family. Um, I would say maybe at that time it became increasingly clear to my family who maybe didn't know my heart as much that I'm Catholic and this is what I believe and I'm going to fight for it. Um, versus some nominal Catholicism and people that aren't Catholic. Like, they sure knew by then, and especially now that I'm in seminary, they knew that this is what I'm about, even though I really wasn't raised by my parents to be a practicing Catholic. They gave me a lot of seeds, but it wasn't them who watered them necessarily. Um, and I would just say, like, my mom ended up a more practicing Catholic, and I think my vocation was greatly influenced by that time in my life a few years ago.
So I just, again, brother, it's just the witness, I think, of just you, how you're living, and just like how it's influencing your family. Like you said, like they maybe didn't know before this moment, but now they're like, oh, like he's all in, and just like the witness that that can be to everyone in your family, to your friends, and things like that. So, what was the experience? What was the shift after you lost your father to you entering seminary, and how did that? Did your grief play a part in that decision, or how did you discern to enter?
Yeah, so my vocation discernment is a much longer story over like 10
A
years,
separate one.
basically.
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
No, but I would say during this time of my dad's loss, and overall, there's been a number of deaths in my family the last 4 years. I've lost 5+ family members. So grief has been a big part of the way I've operated the last several years. The Lord has given me a lot of great crosses to offer up and to suffer a lot. Um, so yeah, my dad died. We had the funeral, but the next couple months I just felt extremely restless and kind of lost there for a bit because okay, we did all of the right things, but I feel empty-handed now. I don't know where to go. I was trying to offer it up, but just, left this just heaviness in my life, this hole in my heart. It was shattered, really. So I spent a lot of the next year trying to understand my emotions and understanding, okay, what does my life look like now, especially with my mom, how our family dynamic dramatically changed. A lot of good things, a lot of bad things, but the Lord was inviting me to rest and deal with all of that. Um, so that was late 2021 and early 22 that was happening. But by about the year mark of my dad's death, I was on a I was on a discernment retreat, or not discernment retreat, sorry. I was on a parish retreat, kind of a generic become a man of the parish kind of thing, become a better disciple, better man in Christ. They're very good retreats, just something a lot more kind of basic than maybe some of the specific things we do in seminary. Wasn't there to discern my vocation, wasn't there to have some dramatic thing, but in the middle of the retreat, I was just kind of out of nowhere, just like getting not irritated, but I was definitely getting like I was really fixating on the way the server was serving mass. And he was a guy about my age, and he was on the retreat teams serving mass. And I didn't grow up altar serving. Like I said, I didn't grow up Catholic. First time I altar served a mass was, oh gosh, it probably would have been like 21 or 22 after college. No, I served in college, whatever, young adulthood.
Yeah.
So I was like really just like, man, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. I knew enough to be judgmental. And And I that hit me like a ton of bricks. And then I'll get back to my dad here in a minute. But I was meditating that, you know, I'm really focused on the liturgy and what he's doing. And then it hit me, you know, the liturgy has always been my path to the Catholic faith. I started learning about the Catholic Mass by being in a parish choir. I fell in love with um, understanding the movements of the Mass as I've got more interested in like the different liturgical expressions of the church, like Eastern Catholicism and like, you know, the Latin Mass and other things before Vatican II. They very much have been a path for me to the Catholic faith and into the heart of the church and to know Christ. So a few weeks after the retreat, and just I felt like this something had been stirred up and I didn't know what it was. And then at first I thought it was maybe a call to religious life, but I talked to the associate pastor at the parish. Again, this is the same like parish that I had been going to since childhood, in one form or another. Um, and he helped me at least at that, you know, early point, trying to understand my desires and help me understand that maybe it was a call to the diocesan priesthood again, which is something I had discerned off and on in some serious ways and a lot of just like peripheral ways. But also, what was happening throughout that year, especially as I was grieving, was as I started going through the discernment process with the diocese, was understanding the movements of my heart, not just the emotional parts of it, but especially after seeing my dad enter the church, there was a great apostolic fervor that just like hit me. It was just burning within me. After seeing my dad enter the church, I had another family member I helped. I had her receive the sacraments before she died. Um, kind of more of a laid back thing because um, there would have been pushback otherwise. Um, and no one else would have asked for the a priest to come see her. So I did to make sure. Also during this time, I had the privilege of becoming a godfather for several individuals, their babies, and so there was just a lot of like in that time frame, but also the peak of it being my dad's entrance into the church. There was just this like flood of like desire to evangelize, and you know the way I thought I would even feel like this thirst when thinking of like souls. And what I'm getting at is one thing that I realized is the thing like the times I was the happiest in my life, even up to this point, like today, is seeing people receive the sacraments and enter the church. It's a thing that gives me probably the greatest joy. I said that not to be prideful, it's just that's what I've seen, even if I have nothing to do with someone being received in the church, like just seeing someone receive the life of Christ, especially through like baptism and initiation to the church, like that's something that's given me the greatest joy in my life. So, you know, I definitely had to wait. I still like was desiring to discern my vocation, especially as moving further into my career. I'm like, do I really want to keep pursuing jobs in higher positions? And but I was like, what am I doing all this for? You know, I'm just living, you know, the bachelor lifestyle. I'm not really going anywhere. And when the time was right, the Lord introduced the idea of the diocesan priesthood to me in a new way that I hadn't been able to consider before, paired with this apostolic zeal. Basically, what it all came down to as I started going through the different discernment opportunities um, was I potentially get to do this work day in and day out of preaching the good news to people and being deeply involved in their lives to be able to share the sacraments and the grace of Christ with them. And it's like that, what is going to be make me the most joyful in this life, and that's what I've always heard of vocation is your vocation is where you are designed to be happiest, where you can love God the most and return your life to Him, um, to return your life in debt of what He did for us on the cross. And I'm like, I'm happiest when I've seen people enter the church, be reconciled to the church, and then God flipped the switch in me to consider the diocesan priesthood over other vocations. I think in justice, I have to go to seminary and actually find this out. So that's a long way of saying, like, especially with my dad, like that seeing him enter the church and seeing all the graces that flowed from that personally and in my family, it started this thirst in me for souls. Not to compare myself to like Saint Teresa of Calcutta when she said that, or maybe Saint Faustina when she said things like that, but in the way God was calling me at that time, he just gave me these graces. I think of feeling this thirst for souls, and just he, made, in ways in my life made me think I was finally free enough to enter seminary and to be able to pursue this way of life and be formed towards it. And so I think without my dad dying and going and him receiving the sacraments, I don't know if I would be here today. I think that's one of the graces that came out of his death was, you know, the water that watered my vocation. And, only just about a year after that is when I started really seriously pursuing it. And 2 years after that, entering seminary. um, so yeah, I mean, it's not like he died and then I'm like, I need to go be a priest now. But, just like I said, like the saints, things happening out of their deathbeds. I think the strengthening of my own faith and just God giving me some of the final graces to prepare me to enter seminary, um, after attempts in the past to seriously discern, but it just wasn't the right time. Like God made it apparent it was the right time. So I'm just trying to listen to Him now. Now that I'm here, hopefully I'm doing the discerning I hope to do for so long. So
Well, and I just think it's awesome, brother, what you shared. Like, there's, the times you said the times I was happiest in my life, and like that's authentic joy, like authentic happiness, and then moving from that to where the Lord can show you like authentic desire, like a desire that's fulfilling and that draws you into being even more of yourself and like to being even more His. So like in that space that you're in, like you're discerning, and like you said, you've had not just that one grief, but several grief over the years. How do you hold that grief and joy together? Like, what would you, not what would you, but like, how would you say you learn to balance those?
I've also learned a really important lesson. I can make this all sound nice and neat and, oh, isn't that nice what happened? But um, it wasn't. And I can be smiling now and, you can say like, oh, maybe it wasn't that bad. No, it was horrible. My dad dying was the worst thing I've ever experienced. I was the one who noticed him dead. I was the one that had to tell my mom. Yeah, it's one of the worst things you can ever experience. Um, I mean, and I had learned from previous lessons before my dad's loss about redemptive suffering, and I praise God I had that mindset through the various griefs, especially my dad's loss. I had the ability and knowledge to offer it all up to the cross, and as far as I was able, and remember to do so during that time. But like I was describing earlier, I felt very empty after he was buried. It's like, okay, I don't have something to do now. I don't have someone to take care of. I'm just alone with my emotions. So I learned a really important lesson, and I was actually pretty frustrated for a while with the lack of emotional relief I felt after quote unquote doing all the right religious things. I can talk very like high-minded and nobly about like, oh, if we, believe what we need to, we'll bring people into the church, which I do hold that, and I stand by that. But after deeper reflection, I realized that I used the Lord through me used the tools of the church to do a legitimate and necessary thing to take care of my dad and our family as we were suffering through it all. But I had an unhealthy, and probably still do, I'm not going to say I'm purified at this, an unhealthy attachment to the sacraments and the and just like I had a lot of unhealthy, maybe a better way of saying it is I had a lot of unhealthy expectations attached to it. We should be attached to the sacraments. That's the way we're
Yeah.
saying. That's our means of salvation. I'm not saying if you have some bad view of the sacraments to detach. That's not what I'm saying. But
Well, I think,
I
like people think, oh, if I go to the sacraments, if I go to adoration, if I do these things, then the grief or the pain will stop, and it's like, that's not what the Lord is inviting us into, but like that when we go to those things and we access them and we encounter the Lord in them, that like he can grieve with us, that he can sanctify us through them.
and that's what I'm getting at. I was expecting the sacraments to be an opiate to take away my pain. And I think a lot of people, it's a fair expectation in a fallen mindset to have that. And I think it's just human. We want to do the things that get rid of pain, and we're like, the church is where I take my pain. They tell me to make my pain redemptive. But anyways, what I learned throughout all of that is the Lord, through his life, death, and resurrection, made the cross and the crosses he gives us, the pain redemptive. He made it meaningful, but he didn't take away the pain. So I had to live in that pain for a while. And I was still called to offer it up, but I had to deal with the frustration I had at the lack of relief it brought. And we are, like I said, we're body and soul, so I had to deal with a lot of the actual like things, because emotions have a bodily aspect to them. I had to deal with that, the way these things were manifesting themselves in my mind and heart, um, far more than just like, okay, I can have 1,000 masses said for my dad. I can pray for his intercession privately. I can pray 1,000 rosaries for him, Divine Mercy chaplets, whatever. But that's not taking away the hole in my heart. So I had to learn the very human side of it after deeping very diving very deeply into the spiritual side of it. And that's something I still struggle with. Having sometimes frustration, lack of closeness, say lack of closeness, the frustration and just the like, I feel this hole in my heart of grief. Um, it's something I'm continually want to continually offer up to the Lord. But I think it's an important lesson I had to learn is that you can do all of the quote unquote the right things. You can do all the right stuff. You could have a really beautiful funeral mass. You could have certain prayers said versus others, but that doesn't take away the reality of death. And I think also what you said, like Jesus wept over the death of Lazarus. He mourned the death of the relationships of his friends, of Judas and Peter, when they betrayed him. Um, I'm sure he wept much for Judas when he killed himself, that he gave up hope. Um, so grief was a part of the Lord's life, and it's something I've had to learn in my own life. Um, but again, what I always come back to, and I have to remember in Thanksgiving, is that um, I have received far more from all of this experience than I've lost. I've received far greater graces through the pain of the cross, than losing my dad or having this emotion. I think what and kind of the heart of it is like what makes me be able to say that is the hope of seeing him and seeing my family in heaven, because we live for heaven in the end. Um, and the suffering in this life is short. That's things I have to remember. Does that help me in the moment when I'm grieving or frustrated at the loss? No, but it gives me that hope, having the cross to be able to unite it with the help of Mary and Joseph, that, that gives it purpose in the end. And that's what I hope I can end in each time. But also, I can't deny that there's a lot of like very physical and emotional things I had to deal with as well. Just addressing things spiritually was not purely not enough, because God made us body and soul to be united in all things. We dealt with the soul of my dad, but I had to deal with the effects that were left in my body, left in my mom's body, as we dealt with the ramifications of grief. It's something we still carry with us.
I just think that's so important too. So thank you for sharing that because, like you were saying, I think a lot of us fall victim to the fact that we think if we do and say and pray the right things, that like the grief ends. And one of the beautiful things somebody shared with me one time was like the grief that you bear and like the weight that it holds shows you the depth of the love that you have for that person. And that's not necessarily something that you want to take away. But I've heard it said so many times, and it just, I don't know, the more I've sat with it, the more it resonates with me that like grief and love are the same because you
Hmm.
can't grieve what you never loved. And like if there's no grief there, was there really love there? And so it's just like when you hold these two at the same time, it's just like um we want it to go away, right? We want the grief to go away, but then at the same time it's like but the grief is there because there was such a depth of love that was also there, and that's not going anywhere.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I think I also like what you said about like how this experience emptied you of a lot of things so that you could be filled with God. And that way you're aware of how many graces you received through the whole thing, and I find that beautiful. Something that I kind of want to share is how when I first started telling the guys here at seminary about the project of the Memento Mori Fight Club, um, a lot of the guys didn't quite understand what I was trying to say, but I do remember you being just really supportive of this, and how you understood what I was trying to get at, what the Memento Mori Fight Club was, because, and I remember this vividly. You said because the Lord emptied me um, through that suffering so that I could receive Him. So yeah, yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you for being a witness of the Lord's mercy and the Lord's love through that.
Yes, you're welcome, and thank you guys for what you're doing through this, because it's, important, to help speak to, one of the essential calls of our faith, which is to suffer with joy. And the world is full of suffering in so many ways, and it's the church's duty to respond with joy. And, I don't know if we always hear that. And so, you know, I'm sure the podcast has borne fruit already through your interviewees and your listeners. So I hope that's been the case, that people can see the joy in the suffering and like things you've shared, Fidel, in your own life. Um, and just you're a pretty joyful person, in despite of some of the things that you've shared in your own suffering in your life, which is all, a great witness as well.
Yeah.
So thank you guys.
Thank you, brother. Anything else you want to share with us?
Yeah, I think there's 2 points I just want to share. Just again, I talked about this again, but I think a lot of people have a secular view of death. A lot of Catholics have a very secular view of death, or a lot of people have a lot of misunderstandings of theology at death. They either canonize people as they're dying, with no basis of saying that, It's a good intention. People have very good intention when they say that. Um, a lot of people really don't make considerations. They'll put someone's personal will over what the church asks us to consider as we're dying. Um, just again, like God made us free will, and it's our conscience is something that's very important. But like the church proclaims that we are made a certain way, we should live a certain way, and we should die a certain way. And I think a lot of Catholics need to know that more. And so I think that's one thing. And in addition to that, I want to say that, just encouragement for anyone who is listening that has a family member that is dying, or if you find yourself in that situation and they're away, if they're Catholic, of course, make sure they're taken care of sacramentally. Call your parish priest, have them come do the last rites. Um, but if someone isn't Catholic or they're away from the church, you know, I did all of this as a layman. I'm still a layman up until God willing I'm ordained. Yeah, all it took was some conversations with a priest, and I thankfully I had some good holy priests in my life that were able to minister to different family members, and especially my dad. I think one of the greatest fields of evangelization is people who are dying in a hospice care. Like I said, the church has so many things she wants to give us to prepare us for our transition into eternity. And the sacraments are not some prize or possession, private possession. It's something we should share freely. And so if you know someone who is dying or terminally ill or having this knowledge of someone who's dying, you know, pray, pray and sacrifice for them, but you know, make sure, it's not that it may not be that as hard as you think to convince them to enter the church before they die. Of course, the Lord can work far more than people that are practicing Catholics. But the church gives us a sure means of seeing the Lord. Um, so doing things like making sure is someone baptized? Could they be conditionally baptized if you're not sure? Um, if someone isn't baptized and they're on their deathbed, being baptized is that's all it takes, and then they're saved. But I guess my encouragement is, don't have fear in evangelizing to people who are dying. Um, I've had, my dad, and also the great aunt I had, if they, had their full faculties and were alive, I don't think they would have chosen to enter the church through our say. I don't think they would have. And I'm not suggesting that like having people enter the church as they're dying is tricking them. I mean, people have to freely choose. You can't just give them the sacraments. Otherwise, it's not their free will. So people who are dying, it is the greatest mission field. And, if you want to take your faith seriously, I think it's something you really should consider. The greatest gift you can give someone is Jesus Christ and his church, regardless of what someone may say or do. They say, oh, I don't want that. I don't want religion at the end of my life. But if we are to heed the calls of our baptisms to go to the ends of the world to preach the good news, we have to do the same for those who are dying. And also, death empties people to be able to be filled up with the Lord. A lot of people are filled with despair as they're dying, but if you can give them Jesus Christ in the sacraments of his church, that's one of the greatest things you can give someone. So I'd encourage you to call a priest and ask them how you could sacramentally care for someone as they're dying. Um, Again, having someone become Catholic as before they die is a very good way to evangelize, and um, one of the greatest gifts you can give someone. And again, people have to be free. I had another family member recently who, as he was dying, I asked him if he wanted to see a priest, and he said no. And I couldn't do anything after that. I could pray for him, but that's about all I could do. So please make sure people are taken care of sacramentally as they're dying. Um, and just a reminder, that you can do all of these things, as Mary was kind of saying, you can do all these things to put yourself at peace, that someone could be taken care of spiritually. You could do it to make yourself feel comforted spiritually, but we are body and soul, and you have to take care of your body as well. In the end, you'll have to deal with the emotional effects of grief. It colors the way you see the world, especially the first couple months and years. So don't deny your emotions. You have to let yourself feel them. So of course you have, we're called to take care of soul, but we also can't deny the reality of our bodies, and the emotional effects of things like grief or any suffering. The suffering we're called to endure, you know, we don't just feel it in some like vague spiritual way, like we feel it with our entire like body and soul. And it's okay to seek things like psychological help, to seek medical help for things like suffering. But the cross is somewhere to take the pain. But if you like break your leg, um, Jesus is not telling you to ignore getting medical help. If your heart is broken, God gives us legitimate medical means to take care of that. And that's a really important thing to keep in mind, to take care of your soul or take care of your body. So anyways, what I'm saying is like don't ignore your emotions through suffering. Offer them up, but in the process of being healed, that's something you can offer up as well. Don't just live perpetually in your suffering, but know where to take it. But also Jesus wants to heal people. If Jesus was concerned about letting all suffering be redemptive, he wouldn't have worked the miracles to take people's emotional and physical problems away. He wants to take those problems away, but he wants to give the pain before the healing and the pain of healing purpose. There's plenty of pain in the process of healing too.
Yes,
um,
lots of it. Yeah.
if you have to have if you have to have a bone set, there's plenty of pain. As I have dealt with my grief, there's been plenty of pain. But if I hadn't sought the legitimate medical and psychological means to deal with it, the pain would have been worse. So
Yeah, then you can't heal. Awesome.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you so much for just coming on and sharing your heart and your life with us, Jack. It's been a blessing to spend this time with you.
Yes, thank you, brother. We really appreciate that.
yes,
You
thank you
wanna
guys for the invitation.
Okay, everyone, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Memento Mori Fight Club. Remember, nothing is wasted.
Keep fighting the good fight.